Thank you for joining Wars of the Roses. As we begin with part one, we begin our journey of Along Civilization's Trail, an account of recent experiences in mystic places and strange lands by Ralph M. Lewis, KRC. An article taken from Rosicrucian Digest, Volume 15, Number 1, February 1937. Along Civilization's Trail, an account of recent experiences in mystic places and strange lands by Ralph M. Lewis, KRC. Editor's note. Because of the numerous requests which have been received asking for an account of the experiences of the Supreme Secretary and his party on their recent journey, he has consented to relate them in the Rosicrucian Digest. Their expedition, which it was, in fact, took them to remote sections of the world in quest of photographic records of the early civilizations and the development of thought of early peoples. Their experiences were most unusual and thrilling. They were privileged to receive mystic initiations, to meet high dignitaries of centuries-old brotherhoods, to probe in age-old archives, temples, ruins, and strange places because of their exceptional credentials. Some of the rites participated in by them had not been previously performed in the same place for thousands of years. The Supreme Secretary tells of his impressions during a mystical ceremony in the heart of the Great Pyramid, and of meeting masters of renowned philosophical orders, of entering the sacred shrine of Pharaoh Amenhotep III, and of many other events that will delight the lover of mysticism, archeology, and adventure. The following article is the first episode of this interesting narration. We begin our journey. We watched her turn slowly and steam majestically in the direction of the French coast and Havre. Standing on the rolling lighter being towed to the Plymouth docks, a 10-minute ride, we were suddenly conscious that we were now on our own. For 7 days we had traveled on the great ship, but it seemed for the first time that we had truly left America. There had clung to the ship since we left New York a distinctly American spirit, an atmosphere that was quite like home. We were not alone in this feeling, apparently, for the joyous exclamations with which our fellow passengers had greeted our arrival at the Plymouth Harbor had ceased. They seemed contemplating the severing of past ties and the assumption of new ones. Finally, as one body, the several hundred passengers, crowded between stacks of baggage, turned and looked toward the shore which we were rapidly approaching. Here was England, and cliffs that looked chalk-like. They were not high, but precipitous and fringed with a green that was pleasing to the eye after days of the blue-black of the Atlantic. Immediately before us was a V-shaped cleft in the abrupt face of the cliffs, in which nestled the city of Plymouth, from which the famous pilgrims to America had departed. Perhaps it was because it was a sudden relief from the monochrome of the sea that the roofs of the homes that spread up the incline of the cleft appeared so brilliantly red. We were soon milling up the gangplank behind our porters, who were heavily laden with our personal luggage and special equipment. As we looked about, 1,000 strange sights caught our eyes. The things were different, but not necessarily inferior to things of our own land which served the same purposes. There was the waiting express that would take us to London. The individual exterior door of each compartment and the side aisle of each car made them different from our end-door, center aisle American cars. But there could be no question of their equality to ours in many respects. Again, we noticed in the railroad yard a congregation of freight cars of various heights, widths, lengths, and types of wheels to accommodate different kinds of cargo. They were strange in comparison to our nearly uniformly designed box and gondola cars, but this did not mean inefficiency or imply a lack of modernity. Unfortunately, the American has acquired the habit, perhaps because of his geographical isolation, of thinking that what he is accustomed to is the standard by which the rest of the world should be measured. He fails to realize that other peoples have needs in common with his own, and have developed systems for meeting those needs as satisfactory as his, although different in manner of application. America is a symbol of modernity to the American because there are no monuments of the old order of things about him. Foreign modernity does not appeal to him because he believes the new age is exclusively an American development. This is mainly due to the fact that the American's interest in Europe has been aroused by stories of the quaintness of its past culture. Because of the exploitation of customs and styles from 2 to 5 centuries ago that are nearly as strange in Europe today as they are in America, the American imagination becomes actually shocked by the reality of European nations displaying a modernity equal to his own. He vaguely knows it exists, but prefers the picturesque conception of a Europe of the 12th century. Psychologically, such a conception gives him a feeling of superiority which he tries courageously to cling to when traveling abroad by purposely avoiding the new Europe whenever he can. Ours was more than a tour, it was a serious venture and a responsibility. We were to represent the AMORC at a conclave including the highest officers of the oldest arcane societies of Europe. Momentous questions were to be discussed that would shape the future course of these organizations. We were signally honored, for we were the only representatives of any occult, mystical, or metaphysical society in North or South America to be invited by virtue of our credentials to participate in such a conclave. Hundreds of societies in America claim and have claimed worldwide connection of long lineage, but none could produce the necessary authentic proof to receive the coveted recognition. I was to be tested, and if personally found qualified, to receive the honor of initiation in one of these esteemed brotherhoods which traces its origin back into the centuries. The prospect was thrilling, but there was always the sobering thought of what might be demanded of me. I thought of the Imperator's first journey abroad when he was given the authority to re-establish the work and teachings of the Rosicrucian order in America, and I felt with pride that in a minor capacity I was following in his footsteps. How high his hopes must have been, how he must have felt that destiny was his guide. I must confess that our greatest trepidation was for the success of the other purpose of our venture. We were to capture on film the spirit which had moved men and women to found and carry on the Rosicrucian order and its teachings. We were to find its early landmarks, the places which harbored its temples and shrines, and the site of civilizations and cultures which added their wisdom to the glory of its teachings. We were to trace the development in wood, stone, art, and religion of the consciousness of man, which led to the conceptions we hold sacred today. The search for light, for knowledge, and the mastery of life had carried man westward through the centuries. We were to photograph the milestones of his trek across continents. Mechanically, we were well prepared for this phase of our venture. We had a 35mm professional-type debris motion picture camera with extra heavy tripod, equipped for tilting and panorama views. In addition to a complete assortment of light filters, meters, reflectors, and other necessary accessories, we had an array of fast lenses, including a 6-inch telescopic lens for enlarging distant objects. Realizing that we needed an excellent still camera to reproduce scenes which we hoped to take for magazines and books published by AMORC, we took along a Graflex. Not trusting to the possibility of being able to secure the type of films we needed in foreign lands, we took with us thousands of feet of super-sensitive panchromatic film for the motion picture camera, packed in hermetically sealed cans to resist dust and thermal changes. Our film supply also included dozens of packs for the Graflex camera. Our equipment luggage numbered 10 pieces, varying in weight from 15 to 50 pounds. Our total baggage was 21 pieces. Before we departed, Freighter Brouwer, courier car technician and member of the party who was familiar with photography and motion picture equipment, had spent weeks in becoming accustomed to the special equipment he was to use, but how different his preparatory conditions were to those he was actually to encounter. The gods of fortune smiled on us, for after only a slight delay in the customs, we were comfortably seated in a compartment of the boat train, rushing through pastoral lands to London. Our party was not large, yet it was representative of the activities of the AMORC in San Jose. It included Freighter Harry Shibley, president of the Rosicrucian Press, Limited, which separate corporation is responsible for the tremendous task of printing millions of pieces of literature yearly to supply the order's needs. Mrs. Shibley, Freighter Kendall Brouwer, to whom I have referred, and Mrs. Gladys Lewis, member of the board of directors of the Supreme Grand Lodge. As we fixed our eyes on the fleeting landscape which was bathed in the golden glow of a late summer day's setting sun, we commented on the intensive cultivation. Everywhere were fields of grain, patches of vegetables, pretty gardens and meadows. There were no barren wastes, bad lands and salt beds such as we had seen for hours in crossing western United States. How fortunate that England could utilize so much of her small island home. The shortage of native timber was brought to our realization by numerous hedge fences instead of rail or post and wire ones to which we are accustomed in America. It seemed a combination of utility with artistic grace. Rushing along now through the twilight, we looked out into the gathering dusk at twinkling lights in the distance. I recalled bits of early English history. I thought of baronial halls, great manors, intrigues against the crown, the three-cornered contest for supremacy, with crown, barons and churchmen aligned against each other. It was not difficult to understand the contempt this great nation must have felt in its state of security, with its centuries-old customs and well-ordered society for the demands of a handful of colonists thousands of miles away in the frontier country of America. What Englishmen secure in English society and comfortably bolstered by the homeland's reassuring traditions would have given an inch of England for the future of the religionists and self-exiled subjects who made up most of the population of the New World in the 18th century. Certainly the attitude must have been strongly expressed by the majority as, "Let them have America." Our first morning in London was sparkling in sunlight. California-like blue skies were given motion by an occasional lazily floating white cloud. For a moment, as we stood on the Strand directly in front of the entrance to our hotel, we had a pang of disappointment. This was not the London that novelists portray for the American imagination. Where was the yellowish smoke-like fog through which we were told, even in the day, only the yellow aura of the street lamps is visible? A fog that gives all passers-by a wraith-like form. Reason then told me how fortunate we were that such a condition did not prevail today, and how fortunate we would be if it did not exist during our stay in England. For we were here to photograph. Every large city throughout the world, it is said, has a personality, certain characteristics, not physical form but environment, which makes it distinctly different from every other city, regardless of how similar they may be in skyline, industries, customs, and general appearance. Every world traveler has felt this, and yet cannot definitely point his finger at the contributing factor of a city's personality. It is undoubtedly, as it is in human beings, the aggregate of unseen differences in character which constitutes the personality. As a city has a personality, so too does it have a soul. In every city there is some site, some edifice, historical monument or structure which symbolizes it, which fairly breathes the spirit which it represents. Flash the Eiffel Tower on the cinema screen, and people do not merely know it is of Paris, but it somehow fits into the niche of the subconscious visualization they have of Paris. We were to visit the soul of London, of England. A traditional high box-like London taxi with its odd luggage railing framing its top stopped with screeching brakes before us. The driver poked his head through the window in our direction and said, "See the sights, sir?" Somehow this knowledge which natives of every country have in some peculiar fashion, or that at least seems peculiar, that you are a foreigner, and worse still a tourist, is very deflating. One likes to imagine he is quite at home, in appearance at least, in every land. No matter how carefully, in your own opinion, you mimic the dress and mannerisms of the citizens, in some mysterious way they see through the camouflage. While I held the cab, Frater Brouwer, with the assistance of several very curious porters, loaded the bulky cinema equipment into it. Nowhere, except perhaps in California, is professional motion picture paraphernalia taken casually. The farther one gets from California, the more intense is the fascination for the devices that make the fairyland of the silver screen possible. We rode for 10 minutes along crowded thoroughfares, winding in and out between London's famed giant double-decked omnibuses. We discussed the confusion we would personally experience if we were to drive on the left side of the road, as we were now being driven just opposite to the side on which American traffic travels. Suddenly, we were riding along the Thames with its low, grey stone retaining wall. A moment later, we stopped with a jerk at our destination, Westminster Bridge. Piling our equipment in a confused mass against an abutment of the bridge, we turned and gazed from our position of halfway across, straight ahead. There they were, a compact unit. The Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, and Big Ben, the mammoth clock whose chimes had resounded around the empire. The slender turrets which graced the sides of the Houses of Parliament impressed me as being like the delicate filigree wood carvings of some Swiss antique. Yet with this finery there was about them an atmosphere of strength and solemnity. Slowly, steadily, the Thames flowed by under our very feet. Time, periods in English history, decades of strife and of prosperity had also moved by as unceasingly as this river. But there, unchanged by it all, existed this soul of the British Empire. From this dot in the world, millions of people at the far corners of the earth were governed. New ideas, radical tendencies, unstable influences were all tempered and steadied by its spell. The spirit that was England's dwelt within those grey walls. Church and state, figuratively and literally, stood side by side. Here was an example of the true value of tradition. No one can deny the progress of England or its place in the foremost ranks of civilization today. Its advance has been sensational in many ways. Yet when upsets came, as they did at times, it slipped back no further than the traditions which were bred in the bones of its sons and which constituted the last high level to which it had climbed. Traditions which do not retard but which act as a bulwark against decadency in eras of weakness are the safeguard of a people or of a nation. Simultaneously, we stopped our musing and proceeded to seek the best position for a shot, cinematographically speaking, of what we saw. Our foremost thought was to reproduce on film, if possible, enough of what we saw with our eyes to instill into the minds of an audience the impressions we had received. But therein lies the secret of the true art of photography. Why, we may be asked, were we filming the Houses of Parliament and Westminster Abbey, and what relation had they to Rosicrucian landmarks and personalities of the past? In reply to this, we need go no further than the eminent Sir Francis Bacon, past Imperator of the Rosicrucian Order, and also Lord Chancellor of England in the 17th century. Philosopher and mystic, he was also an important factor in England's political life, officiating on many occasions in these same dignified edifices before us. As for Westminster Abbey, it is more than a church, a place dedicated to worship, or even a monument. It is a pantheon. Beneath its flooring lie England's great. They are more than England's. They are the world's noble dead, for they made contributions to humanity, to civilization's advancement. Among them are those who were identified with past activities of the Rosicrucian Order. What simpler respect could we pay them than to film the place of their last rest to be viewed by their brethren of today? They were a good-natured crowd, these Londoners, as they jostled one another to get a vantage position to watch Frater Brouwer grind out several hundred feet of costly film as we recorded this soul of England. Big Ben was not to be forgotten. Through the telescopic lens, we brought it to within 100 feet, visionally, of where we stood. We photographed the hands in the position of the quarter hour and half hour so that the sound of the chimes could later be synchronized with their position. In a series of short, rapid trips about the heart of London, we took several views of prominent squares and circuses, at one time mounting our equipment on the great library steps and filming the noted, busy, noisy Trafalgar Square. We were to leave London next day for a 100-mile journey northward to Salisbury Plains. The mysterious Stonehenge was to be our destination. As we expected, we had to first obtain permission from His Majesty's Department of Public Works before being allowed to take professional cinema pictures there. Still, camera pictures were not ordinarily prohibited. A preliminary investigation revealed that upon application by mail, after a 10-day delay, we could expect a reply to our request. 10 days, how disheartening. We were scheduled to leave England before that. Must we fail at the very beginning of our journey? What could be done? There is no maze like the entwined activities of government departments. It may seem strange, but in endeavoring to locate His Majesty's Department of Public Works, Bobby's guards and attendants at public offices gave us conflicting directions. This condition is almost always experienced in conducting business with departments of the leading governments of the world. Each petty official or assistant is not made to familiarize himself with the relationship of his department to any other, and usually is in ignorance of the administrative structure. This condition prevails in America as well. This isolation of departments makes it exceedingly difficult to locate the required official. unless you know exactly the title of the department to which he is attached. British officials are at all times courteous and respectful, and unlike those of many other countries, are not unduly impressed with the authority delegated to them. Presentation of credentials showing that we represented a fraternity devoted to the study of the sciences and which maintained a free museum of antiquities, and also disclosure of our connection as individuals with internationally known societies of research, accorded us the needed exception to routine procedure. The Department of Public Works immediately issued a permit to take cinema photographs in Salisbury and vicinity. Tomorrow we were actually to begin photographing rare antiquities for the order. We were highly elated at this, our first success. There is something so gratifying about a rural motor trip in England. The low, rolling hills with occasional wooded strips, all intersected with winding streams, are enchanting. Everywhere were wild shrubs which seemed so perfectly trimmed and artistically arrayed that it was as if man had undertaken a gigantic landscaping project. However, it is not nature which lends England her greatest enchantment. It is the quaint villages with which the countryside is dotted with their century or more old churches and slender steeples. The public squares which once formed the hearts of these villages are framed by sloping two-story structures with high-peaked roofs, tall windows and superimposed balconies. The timber ends which protrude from their fronts, and the lattice-like strips which form a design on their faces, blackened with age, contrast with the greyish-white of the stucco-like plaster with which they are sealed against the weather. One sees, side by side, on the lower floor of these structures, the criss-cross leaded window of a bake shop, with all the appearances of Dickens's time, and the modern large plate glass front of a branch of England's popular-priced merchandise chain store, a contemporary of our own American Woolworths. How incongruous the modern automobile seems when parked before tea rooms in buildings obviously of the 17th and 18th centuries. Many of these old dwellings and buildings have long since ceased to serve any real usefulness. Although still occupied, they remain to mellow the harshness of the new age and to remind one of the quiet elegance that was once Old England's. Thoughts of a great wood fire in an open hearth, planked floors and the wooden benches of an old town tavern were engendered by a driving cold rain, which caused us, although in summer, to pull our light topcoats about us as we drove rapidly along smooth, narrow highways. Leaving behind us the historical town of Salisbury in Wiltshire, with its renowned cathedral, we headed out over the great Salisbury Plains for Stonehenge. These were typical plains, much like those one sees in Western Canada and the United States. They indicated the plentifulness of England's rainfall, for they were covered with a plush of vivid green. There were to be seen no villages or farms, even few fences. "There it is," our driver suddenly exclaimed, pointing to the left. It was still quite distant. We looked intently at what appeared to be large, oblong, greyish objects standing on end and leaning against each other at rather a sharp angle. Candidly, I was disappointed with my first view. This disappointment was not shared by Frater Bra. "Just as I visualized Stonehenge," he declared. A minute or two later, we were outside the high wire enclosure which surrounded it, one of England's strangest antiquities, now a government monument. Its setting was quite incongruous, for a short distance away was a modern military aerodrome. Our proximity had not changed my first impression. The giant, roughly hewn monoliths stood upon a level plain surrounded by grass, cropped as closely as that of a golf course. There was no approach to them, no fallen stones or fragments of an ancient structure to quicken one's imagination and draw attention to the principal antiquity as the climax of some great achievement of a forgotten race. There was lacking that dramatic setting one expected from so mysterious a relic of the past. In effect, it was as though these gigantic stones had been transported from their natural surroundings and deposited here solely for exhibitional purposes. What remains of Stonehenge is an inner semicircle of huge stone blocks which were crudely shaped by hand by some unknown race. Each of the four-sided sandstone and bluestone pillars penetrates the soil for a depth of about 4.5 feet and towers above for a height of 15.5 feet and weighs approximately 26 tons. 9 still stand and 11 are recumbent. Several of the massive monoliths are joined at the top by horizontal stones of like nature, forming cross ties or beams. The uprights have a conical tenon, which dovetails into a mortise at each end of the horizontal stone. Some distance from this inner circle there is the remains of an earthwork which formed the foundation of an enormous outer circle of pillars. Naught but the bases of this once great outer circle are now to be seen. At the northeast of the inner circle, 2 of the uprights with their crossbeam compose a crude pylon. Standing in the center of the pylon, one looks out at a distance of about 100 feet at a great slab of recumbent sarsen, one end of which is partly buried and which is known as the slaughter stone. An equal distance beyond, standing upright, is the heel stone. Tradition has it that when the rays of the rising sun struck the heel stone and cast a shadow on the slaughter stone, at that moment an animal, some say a human being, was offered to the sun god as a sacrifice. Large avenues of stone columns as roughly hewn as these monoliths once led to it. Speculation is still rampant as to the origin and age of Stonehenge. It has been a battleground of archaeological theories. One theory is that it was erected as a temple of worship by the Romans during their occupancy of England 2,000 years ago. This is not logical for various reasons, primarily because the workmanship lacks that mastery of masonry that was the Romans. Again, it is said to have been built by the ancient Druids as a place of worship or as a sepulchre. This theory also lacks authenticity and has little to support it, even in imagination. The most acceptable explanation is that it was built during the latter part of the Stone Age and at a time when civilization was dawning in Egypt. It is presumed that the Great Circle constituted the hub, and the radiating spokes or colonnaded avenues led to the primitive huts of the Neolithic builders. Fragments of pottery and reindeer picks of that age were found in the debris of the ruin. It was quite evidently used as a place of mystical ceremony. Elementary as it is structurally, it is not symbolically. The great outer circle, the inner circle, the massive altar, the entrance to the east, the stones erected to block the sun's rays and cast significant shadows at a specific time, reveal a worship not necessarily of the sun, but of nature's phenomena. The slaughter stone is named not by fact, but merely by speculation. May it not have marked the place of initiation into mysteries long since lost to man? Perhaps the shadow of the heel stone fell upon the brow of some humble neophyte, who knelt with head bared and arms crossed in supplication, facing the mighty globe of power, illumination, and life-giving force, which gradually ascended from below the distant horizon. It was no casual undertaking, the building of Stonehenge. It represented some tremendous expression of inner feeling, a people reaching upward for something not quite comprehensible to them. The task, with the very crude tools which they must have had at their disposal, was enormous. It reveals that the place that was to house the spirit of man's God always excelled in splendor and majesty the edifices he constructed solely for himself. Even the non-religious must admit this virtue of selflessness, which religion instills in the breast of man. It unites men to serve a common ideal in a manner that private interests could not inspire. Frater Brouwer took several Graflex or still camera photographs of this impressive place from different angles. See photograph in the November 1936 issue of the Rosicrucian Digest. Then he frantically assembled his cinema equipment and maneuvered for a position which would reveal photographically a picturesque view of a portion of the strange structure, while casting his eye upward at the menacing rain clouds. Just as he began to crank his camera, down came the rain, and we scurried to shelter. Between showers and after shifting the camera equipment to various positions in the center of the great circle and beyond it, he succeeded in obtaining several hundred feet of worthwhile scenes which, when viewed weeks later, we considered compensation for the effort in obtaining them. The room telephone rang. I answered it and was informed that my visitors had arrived and were waiting for me in the lounge below. I mused, as I descended in the elevator, that only a few days before, we had looked with the keenest of anticipation toward the filming of Stonehenge and had thought of little else. And now all that was past, and we were on the eve of our departure from England. Only one more act of importance required my attention. That was to again confer, after several years, with our good Frater Raymond Andrea, Rosicrucian Grand Master of the English jurisdiction and author of several popular Rosicrucian works, and his London associates. They awaited me now. I stepped into the spacious reception room and the fratres rose to greet me. One cannot help being impressed by Frater Andrea. Physically he is not large, but yet one is not conscious of his stature. His eyes hold one's attention. They are keen, penetrating, and in a quick glance he seems to completely probe the depths of your feelings and appraise you. As piercing as they are, there is dancing in them the light of merriment and kindliness. Soft-spoken, he speaks only to convey a worthy thought, preferring to listen and weigh words. His quiet manner wins confidence by the friendliness that radiates. One is impressed with the thought, here is a modern mystic. He wears no strange costume and has no peculiar habits, and neither does he resort to odd conduct. Dressed in a conservative business suit, moving about in a 20th century world, he's able to accomplish in a modern way among present-day peoples the things we think of as having been possible only among the robe-garbed mystics of the Middle Ages. However, strange rites and queer methods of living we know do not make the mystic. Such things are practiced for the credulous who have a fantastic conception of the mystic as a weird being, dropped from a place far above the earth to descend among mortals and by some magical process elevate their consciousness. The other fratres, one an active and the other a past officer of the London Rosicrucian Lodge, could have in appearance passed anywhere in either America or England as professional or prominent businessmen, as they were in fact in private life. Only by engaging them in conversation would a stranger realize by their remarks that they had a far deeper philosophical conception of life than that held by the average professional or businessman. This meeting was truly a hands across the sea. It made me realize and feel proud of the extent of the Rosicrucian order, AMORC, and its influence, here thousands of miles distant from San Jose. I was received as a friend and a brother because I was a follower of the Rose and Cross. Nationality and religious differences, if any, melted away into a great common understanding. It was beneficial to us all to discuss the hopes and ideals of our respective jurisdictions, which embraced continents and nations as well as millions of souls, many of whom were already traveling the path of light with us. The early morning hours were beginning to crowd the night before we bade farewell and departed. Once again we were on shipboard. This time we were standing on the crowded deck of a small channel steamer, ploughing her way from Dover, England to Ostend, Belgium. The channel, at one time a safeguard to England, and an assurance against surprise attacks from a hostile power on the continent, as long as England flung a cordon of men of war about her island home, no longer conveys that reassuring feeling of isolation. In less than an hour there can roar over London from European capitals a mighty air fleet of destruction screened by fog which could blast out, so English air authorities advise, the nerve centres of England. The channel itself is but a 10 or 12-minute crossing by air, and therefore is neither a means of defence to England nor a barrier to a hostile air fleet. It is of little importance in this age. The nationalistic fences of a century ago are toppling. Trade and industry, communication and transportation are uniting the powers of the world. The nations must either become a commonwealth of humanity or be destroyed by their own avarice, for there is no wall they can build about themselves that can resist the ingenuity of this scientific age, if that ingenuity is to be used as an instrument of destruction. The coast of Belgium framed the white-capped waves on the horizon, and we knew that we were soon to land. We were to have, in this small, blood-drenched country, experiences which, though we did not now realize it, were to be unforgettable. Thank you for watching, and please don't forget to share, like, subscribe and comment, and if you can please consider donating to Wars of the Roses. Links to PayPal and Patreon are in the description. Thank you so very much.